Hi, my name's Robert Sharman, and welcome to this special Arts Club presentation entitled "The Show Must Go On, Leaving a Legacy." There's this old saying, you don't realize what you've got till it's gone. I always enjoyed going to Arts Club theater, being in the audience, sharing a uniquely human experience, going out with family, friends to dinner, talking about what we're going to see, meeting at intermission, trying to figure out what's going on in the show, being transported, entertained, and challenged. COVID taught us. It taught us how much human interaction means to us. It taught us not to take things for granted. It taught us how important live theater is for us and to the social welfare of our community. Arts clubs, arts organizations, Arts Club included, got very little additional financial support during COVID. We should not take for granted it will survive when, not if, another crisis comes along. I also believe there's another human trait we all share. To have our lives mean something, to make a mark, to make a difference, to leave a legacy. That's why I'm so honored to welcome my three experts here today, experts in helping you leave your mark, about making a difference, experts in helping you think through the complex puzzle of planning your final wishes, of planning a legacy. During the next 40 minutes or so, we aim to provide insights on how to navigate the complexity, how to find the direction that you want in your legacy. The information we're going to provide is general. It should not be used in specific situations. And our content won't just be about Arts Club. It will also be about making things go smoothly, about saving money, about ensuring what you want to have happen, happens. Who am I? I'm a recently retired Senior Vice President, Senior Wealth Advisor at BMO Nesbitt Burns. I did help my clients with their estate planning, but my knowledge is a fraction of what these three experts have. I'm here to learn too. And finally, I've left a legacy gift in my will for the Arts Club. So enough about me. Let's meet our three distinguished panelists. Richard, I'm putting you on the spot first. I've known Richard for a number of years. Richard was a past board member and past chair of Arts Club. He's the one who recognized and championed the need for a legacy circle at Arts Club. He inspires. He always hates it when I say that. He inspires, he educates, and he's a passionate supporter of all kinds of charities. Every time I talk to him, he's on to something new. He is currently, let's see, I get this right, currently the chair of the board of the Small Housing BC and serves as a board member of World Housing. He's active in his legal profession. He's the founding partner of the highly respected law firm Bell Alliance. Bell Alliance has been presenting sponsor for nearly 10 years, I understand.
That's correct.
Next to Richard is Marissa Elliott. Marissa is the founder of Elsay Wealth Management. Did I get that right? Do I say that right?
You did.
I never asked you how to pronounce it. And is one of the top insurance advisors in all of Canada. She sits on the advisory council for Canada Life, which is an important corporate sponsor for Arts Club. In fact, if it wasn't for Canada Life, we might not be sitting on this stage today, because they were an important contributor to the capital campaign that bought the Stanley Theatre. They have been sponsoring productions. Canada Life has been sponsoring productions, and for the last 10 years, they have funded, the student matinee program, which allows young people to come to matinees and be exposed to theater. Now, I know a lot about advisory council, so when I heard that Marissa was on the advisory council, I thought, well, that's all I needed to know, because not only is she highly successful and incredibly knowledgeable and backed up by impeccable ethics, she's been doing it over 20 years. I mean, that's how you get on advisory councils. But what I learned when I started talking to her in preparation for today's event is her passion, energy, and drive, and how she has taken that experience and her master's in financial advisor philanthropy. Did I get that right? Yes. And directed her practice in working with individuals and charities and helping those individuals make a mark and leave a legacy. And rounding out our trio of experts is Rhys Webb. Rhys is a senior trust officer with BMO Trust, which is part of the Bank of Montreal group of companies. BMO, of course, is also a very important sponsor. They were behind getting the BMO Theatre off the ground, a very innovative special space. They were the top sponsor for the 50th anniversary of Arts Club. And when COVID hit and there were no shows at the BMO Theatre, they redirected their contributions. They kept the contributions coming in and moved to help develop new plays. Rhys comes to us with a wealth of experience, and I mean that literally. Rhys is originally from Jersey in the Channel Isles, as you will hear when you hear his accent. And if anybody who's been to the Channel Isles, as I've been lucky to know, it's one of the trust capitals of the world. He's worked in New Zealand as well before coming to Canada. He and his wife now live in Canada. His wife is a chocolatier, so right. I'm anxious to meet her.
Oh, me too.
And I also know from personal experience the great work that Rhys did. I recently got to talk to one of my former clients from my investment practice, and he got her to do something I couldn't. He got her to update her plans and update her will. So that alone impressed me. So that's the introduction. So let's start with the questions. So Richard, let's start with you. I said in your introduction how you've been connected with Arts Club for years. How did that come about? How did you become a leader? Where the inspiration? Can you tell me a bit about your involvement with Arts Club?
Yeah, so I love live theater. I think, cultural amenities are so critical for a community. And for me, what the Arts Club has achieved is a real mix of live theater. I mean, it's not all about singing and dancing to ABBA when we put an ABBA show on. It's delivering some pretty significant issues. And so I always reflect as I'm leaving one of those shows where I've been challenged, how important the Arts Club is to the community. So I got involved, I guess, probably starting about 15 years ago. I would invite a number of my clients and friends to a show at the Stanley, the big production.
So it was a business building process in a sense. You were acknowledging your clients.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah.
And what greater way to do it? So everyone could bring a friend, their spouses or child to the theater. And so we now host over 200 people once a year to the event. And what's really neat, a lot of those people then reach out to me later saying, oh, I've become a season subscriber.
Right.
Because I've been introduced to live theater. So I was doing that, and of course every time I did that I would get a wonderful poster.
Yes.
Thanking me for the event sponsorship. And then ultimately Ross Paul, a previous chair of the Arts Club, reached out to me and said, Richard, you're passionate about this. We would like to invite you to sit on the board. And I agreed to do that, and had a long run there of my 8-year term.
Okay.
Saw some great things take place. The opening of the theater in Olympic Village.
Yes.
Transition from an incredible artistic director, Bill, to a new incredible artistic director, Ashley. So I'm just passionate about theater. I love what the Arts Club does for our community. Well,
that you and I share that. Art, the Legacy Circle.
Legacy Circle.
Talk to us how that started.
Whenever I get asked about the Legacy Circle, I immediately smile because it was probably 15 years ago, and I'd be sitting in the Stanley Theatre, and I'd be looking around, and I think, gee, I might be younger than the average age. I don't think I can say that anymore. But what I felt was that we weren't asking the question of our audience. We weren't asking the question of those people that have supported us for 50 plus years to say, please consider a legacy for the Arts Club. So that started it. It took some time. It was really tough finding a budget for it.
Right.
We managed to squeeze out some money for a budget.
Right.
But now we're just constantly having people become new members to the Legacy Circle. I too have become a member, as in my will.
Okay.
There's a
so I wasn't going to have to push you on this.
No, you weren't going to have to push me.
I think you were before me. I know you were. I know you were. Marissa, when you and I spoke, I was struck by both your expertise and your focus on using the multiplier effect of life insurance in legacy planning. Why this area? I know you were working with other folks, but how did this all come about?
Yeah, so insurance has actually been my area of expertise for about 20 years now, and I've been more and more involved on the charitable sector for about 15 years. Funny enough, you mentioned the 15 years as well, so something big happened 15 years ago.
Some comment.
Yeah.
Is there a 15 years?
Do you have 15 year introduction?
Probably somewhere. Yeah.
Okay.
And you know, for me, when I realized how insurance can be used to help people leave a greater legacy and enhance the gift that somebody can give, it became something that I, started to love to speak about with people and educate people on. It's something I hear quite often still. For many years, I've been hearing from people is, how did I not know about this? And most people, and how come nobody told me about this? Most people are not aware of how powerful of a tool life insurance can be, especially when it comes to leaving a legacy. Insurance really it's an efficiency tool.
Right.
And it allows somebody to leave a gift in one of the most cost-efficient ways.
But not well known.
Not well known. And so for me, it's a part of, my business that's probably one of the most meaningful parts. And I have the ability to help people enhance the legacy that they're leaving and maximize the impact that they can have for causes that are important to them.
Yeah.
So I love it. I'm chatting about it all day, Robert.
I know, but I got to give these guys some airtime. Richard, a lot of your legal practice is on estate planning. Why estate planning? Why focus on
Well, it's sort of part of a life cycle, and I've been going through it. So a lot of my clients, we run a large residential real estate practice. A lot of my clients become clients as their first-time buyers.
Right.
Then they have a child, it's time to move. They have another child, and it's time to move again. So they go through different life cycles as I have. So I shifted from a real estate practice to estate planning practice, in part so that I could support my clients through those life cycles. So it's just a really satisfying area of the practice, especially when you have dealt with them.
Yeah, that natural progression.
It's just a wonderful feeling to be able to help them.
Rhys, trust officer. Why?
Good question.
Other than the fact, I'm not sure there's many other things to do in the Channel Islands.
Right.
Other than look after tourists.
Yeah, so you kind of hit the nail on the head there. So as you mentioned, from Jersey and the Channel Islands, big offshore trust center.
Yeah.
So I was 17 years old. Like many 17-year-olds, had no idea what I wanted to do. Had the opportunity to go to university, but again, had I gone, not sure what I would have done. So I'd done some research into the trust industry, sounded really interesting, so I figured, okay, I'm going to take a job in trust and, maybe figure out what I want to do longer term. 15 years later, so there's the mention of 15 again.
No way!
Here I am, and, the job's taken me all over the world, so it was clearly a good decision.
When you and I spoke, you talked about one of the things that you loved about the trust is working with families. And can you talk a little bit about that? One of the things that helping families.
Yeah, so obviously trust officer acts in many different roles, executor, power of attorney, trustee, and big part of what we do obviously is administering estates. So whether we've been named as executor in the will and we're in charge, or if an executor comes to us and says, look, I'm struggling with this, I need some help, can you kind of take on the admin for me?
Be the agent.
Exactly,
yes, yeah,
agent for executor.
Yeah.
So typically, where I see problems arise is where there's been a lack of communication during the planning stage. So the person's still alive, they're thinking about going to get their will done, but there's maybe no communication with the family on how their funds are going to be distributed. Right. So I'm actually dealing with an estate at the moment where a lady passed away, she was 100 years old. She had got a will in place and had communicated with her children what that would look like. But a few years after that, she'd actually gone and changed her will and failed to communicate that with the children. Yeah. 3 years later, we're still at the litigation phase. And of course, no one can get any money out of the estate while that's all going on. So as you can guess, there's a lot of frustration going around, and of course the family dynamic's been affected as well.
And it's based on the death of a loved one.
That's right.
The emotions are high anyways. So if you got to get caught up in it, yeah, I wish I could say I've never had any experience dealing with clients that are going through it. It was a terrible thing. Richard, Rhys has spoken about the value of having open conversations with estate planning. Can you also talk about what that's important and other things people should be considering as they're getting prepared for a will beyond just the let's make sure the family's on side? Is there some things you can add what they should be doing before they sit down with a lawyer?
Yeah, I think just sort of, I think it's absolutely critical that people do get their estate planning documents in place. But I think the discussion with the family is really important because I'm often faced with clients who say, well, you know, I want to treat my kids differently.
Right.
And there's often really good reasons for doing that. And so I always recommend, well, have the discussion with the family because they will likely completely understand that. And it's much easier that they know that in advance of dealing with the emotional trauma that comes from the loss of a loved one.
Right.
So really essential that that discussion takes place.
And it's easier to explain why you're doing what you're doing while you're alive than after you're dead. Because
there's always, I start to smile again, there's always family dynamics.
Yes.
I'm always excited when I have a family come in and everyone's in the room at the same time and everyone understands what's going on.
Right.
So it really, a significant level of communication, I think, is really important when you're doing your estate plan.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I mean, that was my experience. Rhys, when we were talking, you were talking about the difference between charitable giving and philanthropy. Can you give us? People will use those interchangeably, but they're not. What's the difference from your point of view? What's the difference between charitable giving and philanthropy?
Yeah, so I'd say charitable giving is it's shorter term. Typically it's a one-off donation. There's no opportunity to have an influence on kind of what those funds are used for. Whereas philanthropy is more strategic. It's longer term. And it's when someone would like to actually have a say in how those funds are used. So it's not just, here you go, here's a donation, do what you want with it. It's, here's a donation, you know, this is how I see it being used, and I'd like to be consulted on what's gonna go on with those funds.
So legacy would be more philanthropic. It would fit under the philanthropic column.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to dig into a little bit more about how someone can give, because a lot of people, I think, it's just cash. What sort of things can be donated? What can people donate? Like, and charitable. There's these charitable funds and charitable trusts. Can certain assets be used to set those up?
Yeah, that's right. So donations can be anything. You know, typically people just think of cash, but it doesn't have to just be cash. It could be securities in kind. So don't sell the securities. They can actually be donated in kind. If there are unrealized capital gains on those securities, the donation credit can actually be used to offset some of those. Same with real estate. You can donate real estate in kind to charities. Same thing. If there's unrealized capital gains on that real estate, then the donation credit can actually be used to offset those.
So like a revenue property could be given.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, exactly that. There is registered account proceeds, life insurance proceeds, and even annuities. In terms of the different vehicles, so one of those is a charitable foundation. Mm-hmm. So typically they're quite timely and costly to set up on the front end in terms of the legal fees. We usually say $1 million and up.
So $1 million and up for a foundation.
Yeah, okay, is what you'd be looking at to make it worth it, just due to the front end cost. They're quite hands-on, the foundations. You know, we've been approached quite often by people who set these foundations up and they don't realize the amount of work involved. Mm-hmm. And they say, hey, you know, I just kind of want to say where the money's going to go. Can you guys take over the admin side? There's an annual disbursement quota, so there is a certain percentage of the foundation that has to be paid out each year, and there's penalties if that's not done. Another vehicle is a donor advised fund, so these are much quicker to set up. We've done quite a lot of these at BMO. In fact, last year we were approached by a BMO client. It was early December. and he just sold his business. So he was looking for a tax credit in a rush before year end.
Okay.
So the big advantage of the donor advised fund is you don't actually have to know where you want the funds to go when you set it up. You can actually park the funds in the donor advised fund and decide later down the line. So as soon as you put those funds in the donor advised fund, you get the donation tax credit immediately.
Okay.
Then from time to time you can make recommendations and say, okay, you know, I want to transfer X amount here, I want to donate X amount there. And like I say, we do these at BMO and they're managed by our investment professionals, so the funds actually grow as well while they're in this.
So a plug for a corporate sponsor, BMO. Good. good job there, Rhys. You mentioned life insurance, so that's my entree to switch back to you, Marissa. The legacy side of things. You know, we spoke about this earlier, and even though I had a life insurance license, I really didn't know much about this area. How can you use life insurance for a legacy?
Great question. So, you know, and I'll use you as an example because you mentioned that you have the Arts Club in your will, but you did not mention that you have an insurance policy for charity. So I'm going to use you as an example of how it can be set up. Just wait, pitch is coming after here. So there's a few ways of setting up. One way is you, Robert, say, okay, Marissa, I want to set aside X amount of dollars annually into a permanent insurance policy. So we take out a permanent insurance policy.
Right.
Permanent meaning it doesn't expire. So some policies expire at 75 or 85.
So it's not term.
It's not term. It's a permanent insurance policy that lasts. If you pass away at 120, it will pay out at that time. And you can put into it any amount that you choose. So you'll tell me what you want to pay either monthly or annually, and you own the policy. And you designate the beneficiaries of the policy the Arts Club, or you could even have several charities in there for different amounts.
So you could say, I have 3 or 4 different beneficiaries. You could use one policy.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
And you could even have charity and family. You can split it.
Oh,
so
okay.
There's ways, like I have some policies where there's charities, families, like cousins, like you can have 10%, 5%, 50%.
Okay.
So you allocate that, but you have the opportunity to do designated beneficiaries, which means that it bypasses probate, it's immediate, it's paid out right away. And it's private, which is quite nice for some people. So
well, this comes back to your point, Richard, about not necessarily wanting to treat each family member the same.
That's right.
Gives you the opportunity to have some privacy around that. And what's nice is in the policies that I'll use permanent whole life insurance policies that have a cash value growing within the policy. So there's an asset value to the policy. So you're not just tucking the money away and saying goodbye to it. There's actually a cash value growing, tax sheltered in the policy.
There's an
year.
There's an investment inside
component, correct.
Okay. And that's what's called a participating policy, right?
Correct. In the ones that I have used, yes. There's different types of whole life. I particularly use participating whole life insurance, which we'll talk about shortly. But in this situation, this example that I'm giving you, you own it, you control it, you have the beneficiaries designated as whoever you would like, in this scenario, the charity, and that cash value, you still maintain access to it. So even though right now you say to me, Marissa, I'm okay with putting this amount aside over annually, I don't need this, I'm good to leave this to enhance my legacy and to leave this for charity upon my passing. In the event that something changes and you do need access to that money, you are going to maintain control over that policy and you still have access to the cash value within the policy. But at your passing, the charity will get, in this scenario, if the charity is 100% of the beneficiary, they will get the death benefit, which will be a multiple of what you've contributed.
Right, okay.
So generally, it's, let's just say you put in $100,000, and I'm just using this example here, $100,000 total over your contributions, maybe the gift is $300,000 or $400,000.
Right.
And your tax receipt at time of passing to your state is for the gift, the death benefit, not for your contributions.
So the $300,000 in your example.
Yeah, so not only is your gift a multiple of what you've contributed, your tax receipt is also. So it's really a win-win in terms of maximizing the tax benefits as well as taking something smaller and making something much bigger for the gift.
And that tax advantage is going to be even bigger if you have other assets that are going to attract tax on death, right?
Correct.
You're going to want that
Correct.
The classic one of passing the cabin on.
Correct.
Or, we're in Western
Correct.
Canada, cabin, Eastern Canada, cottage.
Cottage,
right?
yeah.
If you want that passed
Yep.
on, there's going to be sometimes a tax impact.
Correct.
So that's going to help. Okay.
Correct. So that's the first way of doing it. I'm not
Okay.
done just
Yeah,
yet.
yeah.
The second way is you do the exact same policy. So
Yeah.
you again say to me, Marissa, I'm gonna put aside X amount of dollars annually into this policy, permanent life insurance. It's growing in value. Except now, instead of you owning it, you're going to assign it over to the charity.
Right.
So instead of you having access to that cash value to use in your lifetime in the event that you need it, you're giving it to the charity.
Right.
So now the charity they can choose to have part of that cash value sent to them every year, because it's a charity, it'd be a tax-free benefit to them annually, and they would have a check coming to them from the policy every single year.
Right.
So they would have some predictability in terms of, we can look at the numbers and project out for the next 20 years. These are the amounts that are going to be coming in every year, which can help with the operations of the charity.
Which speaks to my concern originally about arts clubs, charitable organizations who suddenly find themselves in a crisis.
Correct.
Like we did in COVID. This becomes a source of money they can tap into.
Correct.
Ah,
and there's stability there and security there with those
Yeah.
numbers, because a large part of it is guaranteed. So there's a nice piece there in terms of knowing, but there's a big difference there. One, you own the policy.
Yeah.
You maintain access to that value in the
Yeah.
event that something changes and you decide you need some of that money.
Right.
And the second option, when you hand it over to the charity, when you assign that ownership over, you're saying goodbye to
Yes.
your access of
Yes.
that money. You've given it to the charity, and you now receive a tax receipt
That was gonna be my question.
annually for the contributions to the policy that you make.
So it's not just a one-time deal when you assign it.
No.
You get an ongoing tax cycle.
Correct. So let's say you put $10,000 a year
Ah.
into the policy, you'll receive a tax receipt for the $10,000 a year. And then upon your passing, so not only is the charity receiving the benefit every single year in terms of taking some of that cash value to themselves every year, upon your passing, there's also a large death benefit that's paid out to the charity directly as well. So it's that kind of money isn't just keeping the lights on money and annual planning. Those are larger gifts.
Yeah.
And you see, it's really an opportunity to take something smaller and to turn it into something much greater.
The multiplier. Yeah, well, I said at the outset I wanted to learn something. And I think you and I are having a conversation after this. So
Great.
So what are the costs? How much does this cost?
Whatever you want to put into it. That's a nice thing. We're talking about this at a super high level. I'm sharing with you the different ways of doing it. These are very personalized plans.
Yeah.
These are customized for each person depending on your financial situation, your assets. Sometimes it's built around, hey, what's my death tax? What happens when I die? Well, how can I offset that? How can I choose to leave more towards a cause that I care about and less towards CRA? So sometimes it's built with that. Sometimes it's built with, here's what I could set aside annually that I'm comfortable with setting aside annually or monthly for the next 10 years.
So for our listeners who don't know what CRA is, we're talking Government of Canada
Taxes,
Revenue,
yes.
taxation.
And please, if there's any accountants, do not take offense to that.
Yeah,
I'm totally okay. Or CRA in themselves, I'm okay with paying CRA. But some people like to have the option to donate to causes more than they donate to CRA.
We talked about participating life policies, and you mentioned that you really favored Canada Life. Now, obviously, I'd like to do another plug for a corporate sponsor here. Tell me what participating policy is and why do you favor Canada Life?
Yeah, so participating, when we say participating whole life insurance, is just one of the kinds. It's the kind that I love, particularly, and I'll explain why, of whole life permanent insurance.
Right.
So you're participating in the success of the insurance company, really, and that pool of funds that
you're participating in their profits.
And correct.
Yeah.
And so in this case, Canada Life has a almost $50 billion pool of funds that is their participating fund.
Okay.
It is the largest in Canada, and they have paid out a dividend to everybody who owns these participating policies every single year for 175 years, since 1848.
I think that's older than Bank of Montreal.
Through the ups and downs, recessions, world wars, there's something to be said about that. And so how do they, if I showed you, Robert, a graph of the last 30 years of the TSX, the investment market, and you saw the ups and downs,
remember what I used to do? You remember what I used to do?
In comparison to the insurance, it would be a flat line. It's for Canada Life particularly, it's a 70% fixed income vehicle.
Right.
It's professionally managed.
Yeah.
It's, as I mentioned, the largest one in Canada. They've never taken their product on and off the market, which many companies have.
Yes, yes.
They've paid out every single year. They've delivered on their promises, and they have such a long-term track record that for me, when I set these up, whether it's for personal planning, family planning, business planning, or charitable planning, I want this policy to represent safety, security, high guarantees, low risk, something that has no volatility to it.
Well, especially for this purpose.
Exactly. And so for me,
buy internet stocks in your trading account.
So not for this.
But get your
not for your insurance planning, not for your legacy planning.
Makes total sense.
So yeah, I love their product for that, and for many other purposes as well.
So on the cost, switching to Richard. So what are the costs of setting up a will? What are the costs of getting the plan put together?
It's I hate to say it, but it can vary.
Yes.
Depending on the complexity of the design. But if you think about spending $2,000 to $3,000 to get your will done, that would be a reasonable estimate. And I know we're going to talk about powers of attorney and representation agreements a little bit later. So it's not a big expense when you think of what happens if you don't have a will. And
what happens if you don't have a will? What goes on if you don't have a will?
Good question.
Yes. That's why I'm the moderator.
The control position.
Exactly.
So if you don't have a will, we have, and most of the provinces have this, is that it's a provincial legislation that sets out exactly what the distribution will be. And quite frankly, in many instances, the distribution that the government legislation provides for is not what the family wants to have be the result. Plus, you're creating extra chaos and stress for a family that's just lost a loved one. So people don't realize the different scenarios under the legislation. And I'll just give you a great example. I had a young couple, and he had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer.
Okay.
And he said, I should get this done. She said, no, we're going to beat cancer.
Right.
And unfortunately, he did not beat cancer. He passed away. He didn't have a will. It was under intestacy. There was investments that...
Intestacy means no will.
No will,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, right.
And so there were a number of investments. So the end result is that the distribution goes to not only the spouse, but to the children. The children are minors, therefore there's now a discussion with the public guardian and trustee. So all the family really should have done, obviously, should have done the will, and everything would have flowed smoothly in a moment of crisis.
Right. That sounds like a terrible situation.
Yeah. And Richard, maybe if I could just jump in there. I'm dealing with 3 estates at the moment, intestate estates, and I can't tell you the pain and anguish that it causes the family because no one knows what's going on. Like Richard said, it's probably not going to be the distribution that was intended by the deceased or what the family expected. And the other thing is, of course, once the deemed dispositions happened on death, there's no opportunity to use any tax mitigation strategies like charitable giving, for example. So, can't overstate the importance of having your documents in place.
When I talk with clients and they're sort of reluctant to get their wills done, I always make this comment that bad things happen to somebody. Mm-hmm. Just turn the news on and someone's had a crisis.
Absolutely.
Car accident, any sort of scenario that you can think of. And so again, you just never know, and so just get it done.
Yeah.
I always refer to it as the best gift you can give your family.
Yeah. That's the intestate. People who do not have a will. We've spoken about that. How about the probate process itself? What is probate?
Yeah, probate is obtaining a court order which formally appoints the executor, or if there is no will, the administrator. And I always use an example with my clients that said, you can't walk into a bank and say, well, here's the will, my spouse has died, here's my identification, here's a death certificate, give me the money. The bank will go, condolences to you and the family.
Right.
Could you go get a court order which formally appoints you? Then we as a financial institution can rely on that court order to distribute.
And how long does probate take? How long?
It really varies. It takes longer in the summer when probate office staff are taking vacation.
But
But normally we think in terms of the initial phase is gathering the information.
Yes.
Getting information from the financial institutions. That could take 8 to 12 weeks.
Right.
We then submit.
Because you got to figure out where everything is.
Yeah, and you know, everyone should be making a record of where everything is. Lots of passwords out there that constantly get changed.
Right.
We're no longer so much a paper world anymore.
Yeah.
So it's really important that there's something down on paper, or the family is very well aware of how to access the assets and what they are. So it's so that's the probate. The probate process starts with the gathering of the information. Once you submit to the probate office, again, you think in terms of 8 to 12 weeks. Now, sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer. They will then send a confirmation. They will request a probate fee,
right,
which is essentially 1.4% of the value of the assets passing under the will.
Okay.
The funds are delivered, and then within about 5 to 7 business days, you'll get your court order, which enables the executor then to proceed to bring the state together into their name.
So the probate fee isn't a flat fee. It's a percentage of the assets. So if you have lots of assets, it can be a big fee, even if the work isn't all that different.
That's true. A $10 million house versus a $2 million house or a $500,000 condo. Significant difference.
But the same amount of work to do it.
Same amount of work.
Sounds more like a tax than a fee. You can't say that. I can.
Wait for it.
Yeah, Marissa, isn't that one of the advantages of insurance, that you can reduce your probate?
Bypasses probate.
Yeah.
So
and why is that? Why does it bypass probate?
That is a great question. I don't, when they created insurance, it has a designated beneficiary, and it allows it to bypass probate. So when you have any assets that have designated beneficiaries, actually I should only speak on the insurance. I don't know about all of the assets, but I believe all assets that have designated beneficiaries bypass probate.
You can do that where? Okay, what are the other things you can?
Yeah, that's right. So on registered accounts, so your TFSA, your RSP, or your RIF, you can actually name a charity as the designated beneficiary, and those funds are then going to pass outside of your estate. So they're going to go straight to the charity. They're not going to be included in the statement of assets and liabilities for the estate.
So that's another way to reduce probate. So your insurance policy, it goes outside. Your registered investment products, if you name a beneficiary.
That's right.
Any other ways to reduce or avoid probate?
A structure called joint tenancy.
Okay.
And so anything that is registered as a joint tenancy, whether it's financial instruments, whether it's real estate, any assets, there is what's called a right of survivorship. So when one joint tenant passes away, the property becomes the surviving joint tenant's property.
So it's not like it's like it hasn't been sold or disposed of.
So basically, the concept of a joint tenancy is the parties jointly own 100%.
Right.
So when one passes away, the survivors own 100%.
Okay.
So it's a technique that we frequently use.
Okay.
I'll give the example of my mother. She's 94 years old.
Right.
I'm a joint tenant on all of her assets.
Okay.
The key is, though, that I've signed a trust document that says I'm holding in trust for her.
Okay.
So it remains her property.
Right.
But I'm registered as a joint tenant. When mother passes away, which she tells me she's going to 100. Right.
Is she going to revise that? Is she going to revise that at 100? Do you think she might go to 101? Or?
I don't know. So then I'll just deliver a death certificate to her financial advisor, her bank and everything. Everything will be in my name. I then hold in trust for her estate.
Right.
So the will still applies, which says distribute equally to my children.
Right.
But I don't have to go through the probate process.
So again, I've learned another. So you can make it joint, but you can have this trust agreement.
That's right.
So I think this comes back to, you want to make sure the lawyer that you're working with knows estates and wills. Yeah. You said you do real estate, but you also specialized in this area. This is an area you're known from. I mean,
this is the biggest part of my practice.
Yeah.
And, one of the other techniques that's used is that you can roll your assets into a trust. So there's what's called a joint spousal trust. So when someone's over 65, they can roll all their assets. The spouses can roll their assets into that trust, It's a tax-free rollover.
Yeah.
So you can put your investments in there as well.
Right.
And then what happens when one of the spouses pass away, the assets are distributed under the trust.
Okay.
They're not distributed under the will. When it's just a single person, it's called an alter ego trust.
Okay, yeah.
So we also use this technique. Sometimes there's challenges in families.
Right.
Where perhaps a child's gone down a wrong path.
Right.
And we have some legislation called wills variation.
Right. And that's unique to BC, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
yes.
it makes, my understanding is it makes BC, so our listeners should know that if they're in BC, this is a province you really want to get this right.
Yeah, so the concept of the trusts can avoid the probate process. It also avoids this piece of legislation or provision within the legislation that basically says that a child who's been unfairly treated or a spouse who's been unfairly treated can make a claim under that particular section of the legislation.
Right.
To make a claim against the estate.
And then back to you, Rhys and Marissa, that's also back to our beneficiary designations. The Wills Variation Act can't attack those things if you've got the beneficiary.
That's right.
Correct.
Yeah, and just if we could go back to the joint tenancy, if I could just add a word of caution there. You know, Richard just mentioned there the correct way to do it, where you have the trust agreement there. But I've seen it where, you know, parents have added kids as joint tenants on their property, for example.
Yes.
And then, you know, the child goes through a divorce, and, well, guess what? Their share of that property is actually going to be included in the divorce proceeds.
Yeah.
I've also seen where parents have added children on bank accounts. I'm thinking of one story right now we had in one of our branches where, you know, son, 18 years old, good kid, was going to a good university, you know, clever boy. He was added on the bank accounts to try and bypass probate. Developed a gambling addiction, emptied the bank accounts. And so, you know, mum and dad come to the branch and say, hey, you know, our kid's done this, can you give us our money back? Well, no, sorry, you know, you added them as the joint owner, so they had every right to go and do whatever they wanted with those funds.
Yeah, and there's no question, Rhys, that there's a discussion that takes place with the clients around that, because there are those risks.
Yeah.
The asset always remains the parent or whoever it was that added the child, but you create these opportunities for bad things to happen.
Yeah.
So it's not a solution for everyone, and so that's why you use these other techniques in many instances of the joint spousal or the alter ego trust.
We're coming up to time, but I want to just quickly, executor, choosing an executor. How do you do? I know there are multiple ways, and in fact, in some sense, I've got two competitors sitting here, because lawyers can be executive. You act as an executor in some cases,
yes,
right? And of course, trust companies.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, my thing when I was an investment advisor, you know, clients would tell me, I'd ask, do you have a will? And I said, yeah, my best friend, who's going to be my executor. You know, people act like it's going to be, you know, the best man at their wedding or their maid of honor. You know, it's a special honor when in fact it's horrible.
It's quite I see people delay, like I sometimes have to follow people around for years asking them to get their wills done. Like, I mean, like very successful, like large estates that really need to be, you want to have the opportunity to say how things would be handled. As you mentioned, in those situations, like that individual would have loved the opportunity to say how things should be handled, you know. And I've had it where people end up delaying because they're like, oh, I don't know who should put as the executor, you know. I've even given them different options and professional executors, and it's something that people have a hard time, but in the process of having a hard time making a decision on that, they don't take any action moving forward.
Right.
So
which in itself is a decision.
So it's great that we have some great options here.
well
There's
done.
no reason. Well done on plugging these two. There's no reason to delay any longer.
Thank you for being our peacekeeper.
So the one thing I always comment on is that the only people that ever agree to be executors are those that haven't done it before. Because once you've done one, you go, oh my goodness, this you know, because it is a lengthy process.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the work should get wrapped up in that sort of first first year,
Yeah.
but by the time you've done final tax returns and
Yeah.
everything, it
Yeah.
can slip into a 2-year process, which, most people have busy lives.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree
And they've
more.
not done it before.
Yeah, I've actually sat in meetings with families and I'm watching kids fight over who gets to be executor for mum and dad, and I just laugh because I go, clearly you haven't done this before. This is not a job you want.
Well, I'll reveal something personal. I tried to talk my mother into not allowing me to be the executor, and like many other things, she'd never listen to me.
Yeah.
Sorry to hear that.
So I had experience. I think it's time for us to sing our last song. So I'm gonna give the last question to Richard here. The Arts Club legacy. Why should people consider the Arts Club legacy? Legacy, sir.
A couple of reasons. One is that challenges come up. You referred to it at the beginning. We've gone through a COVID time. We will go through another time. The Arts Club is totally dependent upon selling tickets.
Yes.
Without selling tickets and live performances, the Arts Club just struggles. So I think the importance of including the Arts Club is that it will creates a safety net for the Arts Club when that does happen.
Yes.
Okay. But in addition to that is that, the ticket sales pay for performers and all their supporting cast. But what about all those other things that are so important to the community? The education programs for young people. There's just lots of other programs that the Arts Club continue to offer and want to expand on those. So I think that it's the two things. It's just the right thing to do. If you're sitting in the Stanley Theatre or a theatre, you know what? You're pretty well off in terms of the rest of the world. We live in this great community. I think it's one of the key ways of giving back to the community.
That really, Richard, your remarks really resonate with me because as I think I told you, I was able to sit in the other side of the theatre here on Saturday night and watch The Sound of Music. And what continued to strike me, and I think I said this before we sat down, is the impact that this performance was going to have on the child actors and questioning where it was going to take them in their lives and the impact that it would have. One of my favorite phrases to my clients was, if you don't care where you end up, any direction will do. And I hope today's conversation helps our audience with a couple of things. I hope it will inspire you to make a difference, to leave a legacy, to leave your mark. Secondly, I hope that you understand that there are people, there are experts who can help you navigate the complexity. You don't have to do it alone. Don't do it alone. But every journey requires a first step, and a first step is beginning to plan your legacy. A legacy. Thank you for watching. Goodbye from the Stanley.